teaching you the art of industrial real estate. This is On Air with Team Jensen.
How's it going, Bob?
Everything's great. Everything's great.
Good. Well, thanks for joining us. This is officially episode 20 of On Air, the art of industrial real estate with Team Jensen. You got Dan Jensen and myself, Kurt Jensen, on with you. Stuart Jensen is having technical difficulties, so he's just hanging in the background. So appreciate you coming on, and it was a lot of fun meeting you at SIR at Amelia Island, and excited just to dive in. We really just are going to ask you some questions and highlight your career and kind of what you see in your market, and wanted to kind of hear from the best doing it. So, and I see it looks like you're in your infamous map room.
In the map room, absolutely.
Yeah. But so kind of just jumping right into it, I would love for you to kind of tell your backstory a little bit for anyone who's maybe listening that doesn't know of how you got started in the commercial real estate business.
Sure, absolutely. And guys, thanks for having me on. I've been brokering for 40 years in New York, selling buildings. And in fact, July 16th, next Tuesday, is my 40th anniversary. I start year 41. Nice. And absolutely love the business and got into it completely by accident. I was a freshman at the Wharton School in 1981. Wanted to be the next Gordon Gekko, like every other Wall Street kid, like every other Wharton kid, go work on Wall Street. And wanted to get a summer job that would look good on my resume. So drove around northern New Jersey, which is where I grew up, dropping my resume off at every commercial bank and investment bank I saw during spring break, trying to get a summer job that would look good on the resume. Came out of a Payne Weber office across the hall. I saw Coldwell Banker. I walked in there thinking the place was a bank, gave them my resume. They called me later that day to set up an interview for the following day, which I set up. Went to the library that next morning to look up this bank, so I knew a little about them. I had never heard of them before. So it was a real estate company and almost didn't go on the interview. But they were the only ones hiring college kids for the summer. I took the job, loved it. I was doing market research, driving around Morris County, New Jersey, logging information on every commercial building that I saw, and went back my next summer, worked as running that market research program, and then went back my third summer, got my Jersey real estate license, and worked as what we called a runner back in those days, for an industrial broker, showing space and doing random stuff. And then started with CB in Manhattan when I got out of school in 1984. So complete serendipity got me into this business.
Yeah, well, that's very cool.
Interesting.
And so when you were a runner, you were working for an industrial broker. Is that right?
Yep, that's right. I was a guy named Tom Mulaney at CB, still one of my good friends. And I was showing industrial space to tenants and buyers.
Yeah,
Bob, do you know the names David Hinchman and Greg Owens? Those names ring a bell?
David rings a bell. Yeah, Greg does not.
Well, I have a similar story. I won't go into it all, but I started at CB, and I was a runner under Hinchman and Owens. Owens has unfortunately passed, but David just recently retired. So I know the story. Similar story. I started also in the data bank as the data bank coordinator. Yeah,
that was it. Josh Levering was the data bank coordinator in Hackensack, hired me, and I spent 2 summers in that data bank, and it was great. It got my juices flowing and developed my love of the business. So good stuff. And we have runners these days. We call them transaction associates, but back in the day, they were runners.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think I did my fair share of that when I was getting going, for sure. And so I do hear, a lot of the great brokers start on the industrial side, and I'm not biased at all. That's what I like to think. So, awesome background. And I also think it's cool how I think you've grown your own business, and you've done the national platform. You've kind of had both worlds in front of you. And could you kind of touch on your experience with being an independent and also with being a national, and kind of how and why you decided to go and start your own firm again here in the last handful of years?
Sure. Well, basically started the career at CB. Was there for 4 years. Met Paul Massey, who was my business partner. Basically, day 2 on the job, we said to each other, "Hey, there are a lot of very experienced people around here. They don't seem to be noticing us. Let's just work together, split everything 50-50, see what happens." And we were 2 guys right out of school. We worked really hard, had a good system, and a year later, we were made the bosses of all those guys that wouldn't speak to us.
Yeah.
We ended up leaving CB after 4 years, started our own firm, started with just the 2 of us and a secretary, grew it to 250 people. At Massey Knakal, we had a very, very unusual platform in that we had a geographic orientation towards the business. We put 1 broker in each neighborhood and said, "Hey, learn everything about every brick in this neighborhood, who's buying, who's selling, what the comps are, what zoning changes are affecting value, what new developments are going on." And that very granular approach served us very well, to the point where we started in 2 small territories, had somebody work north of us and south of us and east of us and west of us, and developed that platform to the point where we had every territory in New York City covered. And CoStar started tracking the market in 2001. And we sold the business to Cushman Wakefield in 2014. But from 2001 to 2014, the number 2 building sales company in New York had sold about 1,300 properties. Massey Knakal sold over 4,000. So we lapped the field by 3.5 times. Yeah. And it was a lot of fun to eat the lunch of the big national and global firms. They couldn't come close to what we were doing. They just were not very organized in the way they approached the market. And, it was great. It was a great thing. We sold to Cushman. I was on a 5-year contract there. Cushman then breached the contract by bringing in some other investment sales folks. So we shortened the contracts to 3.5 years. After 3.5 years left to go to JLL, bringing 53 people with me, all of whom were with me at Massey Knakal. 5.5 years at JLL, just got fired from there, and said, what am I going to do? And I said, you know what, get back to the entrepreneurial roots. Opened up my own place, and it feels great. To be an entrepreneur again.
Yeah. Well, I know it's been exciting to watch from afar over here in Kansas City, but I think it's pretty awesome what you're doing. And I like the word granular. I feel like I just read something, it's kind of an old saying, but the harder you work, the luckier you get. And that's a pretty good, method for that approach, I would say. So I'm sure those 4,000 transactions didn't come easy.
No, not at all. Hey, Kurt, let me tell you something. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, luck has played a very, very pivotal role in my career. There's no doubt about it. But I do believe that the harder you work, the luckier you get, and you make your own breaks sometimes. And, we always used to joke around at Massey Knakal that, to be successful in real estate, you only have to work half a day. And we don't care what 12 hours of the day you work, but you got to work 12 hours a day.
That's a good one. Well, and I think it's really cool. When I first met you at SIOR, I think you were on the social media and technology panel or something along those lines. And I thought it was very cool hearing from you. And it sounds like a lot of the things you've been doing throughout your career are just older versions of what you're doing now. And I think it's cool if you could touch on that. I know the concrete thoughts from the observer, you've been doing that for years and years and years. And now you're just leveraging that cool old history and putting it to work on social media. And, if you could share a little bit about what your strategy and your thinking is there, I think some of the listeners would really be curious to hear that.
Sure. There's a lot rolled into that, but I will tell you that we were creating content long before creating content was even an expression anybody heard about.
Right.
I'm going to be announcing as part of my 40th anniversary. I've been working for about a year on a website, bobknakal.com. And one of my personality traits is I tend to be a pack rat. And I had over 20 boxes of stuff from my career going back over the 40 years, old newsletters, articles, all kinds of things. And I put them all together in a very orderly fashion on bobknakal.com. And you can go back and see the newsletters that we wrote in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. And there literally are thousands and thousands of pages of stuff that we've done, property sales reports, the building sales journal, hundreds and hundreds of articles I've written. And you're right, I've been writing Concrete Thoughts going back to 2009 when Jared Kushner bought the Observer and created the Commercial Observer. So lots of content creation. And now, social media is just a way to really leverage the reach that you have. And we had pretty big reach with the old content that we created. Our newsletter started out as just a very simple 4-pager, and with a distribution of about 1,500 people, and got up to the point where in 2007, I think we were 32 pages. It had a distribution of over 300,000 every quarter. So we were, before email really got popular, we were sending out over 3 million pieces of hard mail every year. So we were just bombarding the market with propaganda, information, setups, market reports, all kinds of things. And people still remember that. I still call people today and they're like, hey, whatever happened to you guys? I don't get your mail anymore. And, coming on 10 years ago that we sold the company, but we used to blanket the market with stuff. And, we're always trying to be on the cutting edge of pushing things that other folks are not doing. We did our first capabilities brochure back in the early 90s. That single capabilities brochure that was about 26 pages or so has turned into a series of 9 hardbound books, with one for each property type. And now, using social media the way we are, it's like taking all this content creation and, the reach is remarkable in terms of the folks that we're interacting with on a daily and weekly basis from around the country and around the world. So it's been a really, really cool thing to see. And we're also adopting technology in a very big way. And I am the least technologically savvy person there is. I'm happy my cell phone goes on when I turn it on. But, I'm a big fan of Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's books on business. And one of them is Who Not How. And the main thesis of that book is, when you say, hey, that's a great idea, how am I going to do that? You're asking yourself the wrong question. You should say, hey, that's a great idea. Who am I going to get to do that for me? So I went out and realizing that technology is going to play such a vital role moving forward. I mean, I'll take you back to July of 1984. I show up at my desk. I have no computer on my desk, no fax machine, no cell phone, carried rolls of quarters around to make phone calls from the phone booth on the corner. And today, 40 years later, the world has changed so profoundly. But I think the extent to which the world is going to change over the next 5 years is even greater than what we've seen over the past 40 based on AI and the way technology is changing. And I said, you know what? I have to get ahead of this because I don't believe AI is going to replace anybody, but I believe someone using AI will replace someone who's not. So I went out and hired a COO who is an AI expert. He started AI companies. He worked in driverless cars. So I figured if he can make a car drive itself, he could help me sell buildings.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And AI is something we're working to leverage here more as well. I agree with you. It's something that if you don't get with the times and leverage that tool, I think you're just going to fall behind because it's impossible to compete with the amount of time it can save you and the expertise it can bring to the table. It still needs the human element. I would agree completely to vet things out, but I think that's a huge tool. Dan,
Bob, are you doing full service? Do you do both sides of the house as far as landlord sales and purchases, or do you specialize in just purchase, or what?
No, Dan, my value proposition is about as simple as it gets. I only sell buildings. I only represent sellers. I only work on exclusives, and I only work in New York. And last week I closed deal 2,339. I've exclusively represented the seller in each one of those, and that aggregates to about $22 billion worth of sales.
Wow. I
like to keep life simple. When you're only representing one side of the transaction, it keeps you relatively conflict free, and you also don't have to remember what you say to anybody.
It works out. Well, and I thought something Stuart, who's not on with us, he saw in one of your posts is your comment on how vacant buildings in your market are oftentimes more valuable than occupied buildings. And I thought that was an interesting nugget, and I was curious if you could touch on that a little bit. I get where it's maybe going, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the unique things about the New York City market is that we vacant buildings here are worth more than occupied buildings. And that's mainly because there is this dynamic that users will pay more for a building than investors will. There are several benefits a user gets out of buying a property that they're going to occupy for themselves. They don't have to worry about lease expiration. They don't have to worry about a landlord gouging them on rent, and they have the pride of ownership. They can put their brass plaque on the building. They can put the picture of the building on the annual brochure. So the users historically in Manhattan, users have paid an average of 16% more for a building than an investor will. So whenever we have a vacant building, often a user is the buyer, or the highest and best use of buildings tends to kind of recycle. So I'll give you an example. I sold a building many years ago on East 44th Street, 141 East 44th. It was built in the 1940s as an apartment building. In the 1960s, it was converted to an office building. We sold it for the guys that owned it as an office building to a hotel operator who converted it to a hotel. And now if that building was going to be sold, it probably would be converted back to residential again. Yeah. So anytime you have a building that's vacant, people can look at what is the highest and best use? Can we change the use, or can we occupy it for our own business and get the benefits out of property ownership? So it's a unique dynamic, but I know most places around the country, vacant building, you have to deduct the cost to tenant it, the commissions, the TIs, and everything to get to the cash flow. And so occupied buildings are worth more, but it's just the opposite here.
Yeah.
What about the COVID, with folks sending folks home and in our market in particular, I know, Kansas City is not a robust office market, but there's still quite a bit of shadow vacancy out there where people are still paying rent, but are not in the spaces. Has that affected your market?
Yeah, without a doubt, Dan. I will tell you that what you're talking about is a difference between economic occupancy and physical occupancy. We have in New York City, there's about 100 million feet of vacant office space. There's only 6 cities in the country that even have 100 million feet of office.
Right.
We have 100 million feet empty. So we're also severely lacking in housing, particularly affordable housing. So there is absolutely a synergistic solution to this problem. And our politicians are trying to figure out ways to incentivize the conversion of a lot of this office space to residential. But I think if you look at office in New York, it absolutely has been impacted by the work from home and that kind of thing. And it's important in New York to disaggregate new construction Class A office from everything else. That market is doing relatively well. Big demand, tenants are paying big rents. They want new. Being in a new office building is a completely different experience than being in an older office building. Used as an analogy the other day, it's like being in a high school gym versus being in Madison Square Garden. A completely different experience. For the B and C stock, I think that it will fall into three main buckets. One bucket will be that some buildings are going to remain office because there has to be a low-cost provider of space. Every tenant can't pay $250 a foot in rent. So there'll be the need for more moderately priced office. There will be a bucket that will be converted to residential, taking advantage of these different programs that our policymakers are putting in place. And then the values are getting so low for many of these buildings that even when you layer on demolition cost, the total price is less than land value. So a lot of these buildings are going to be demolished to make way for new construction. So it's really an interesting metamorphosis that that market is going through at the present time.
Yeah. Well, I'd be curious. One of my good friends is a investment sales broker with Colliers here and on multifamily side. And when I mentioned your name, he said that you're a multifamily guy, but I think you really are more of a market guy. And because it seems like you do multifamily, you do office. It really is, like, to your point, what the highest and best use of the building you're trying to sell for your client is. And so
it's interesting. I started out in my whole career, I've been a generalist, working basically on a geographic orientation. I think more and more of my practice is evolving into land sales and development site sales in New York and multifamily. And I haven't been very active in office. I think of all the deals I've sold, I think I've only sold about 142 office buildings. But we're looking at that sector again because they're really not office building deals. They're really more of a development type or a redevelopment type of deal, especially today, like in the Garment Center, which has a lot of very antiquated manufacturing zoning. The city is talking about allowing residential as of right in those districts. And that's going to lead to a lot of conversion of these older, functionally obsolete B and C office buildings into residential. So it's really more of a development deal than an office deal, truthfully.
Yeah.
So I've sold all kinds of properties in the city. The only thing that I really don't have the ability to sell are the very, very large institutional Class A office buildings that are going to stay office. There are some folks here in town that are great at that, and we leave that to them. But just about any other type of property I've worked on and have sold.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Interesting.
And I know you're growing your team at BK REA, and I was curious. One of the gentlemen was on your panel, and I'm blanking on his name right now, but I think he's your director now.
For us, Chima, we've hired to focus on this sector. We've actually hired him to run our office to resi conversion business.
Oh, very cool. And he touched on that he was talking about that when he was on the panel. But I guess I'm curious, did you meet him through SIOR or through a deal? And, I'm curious if you could touch a little bit on SIOR and what that's meant to you in your career.
Yeah, well, I'm unfortunately not a member of SIOR, but I hope to join, and think it's a great organization. I've spoken at many SIOR events and found the crowd to be very, very high quality crowd of folks that go to SIOR events. So I'm a big fan, and met Faraz through social media. Social media has been a wild, wild thing for me. It exposed me to opportunities that I would never have been exposed to without social media. Yeah. And I just, I kind of tried it on a goof, just saying I thought it was a big waste of time. And I said, you know what? Everybody's saying, Bob, you have all these great stories to tell. You should go on. It's a great platform. You'll meet people, blah, blah, blah. And I finally succumbed to peer pressure and said, oh, I'll try it for 3 months, see how it goes. And just been absolutely blown away. And I remember, I think I started January 1st of 23, and I think it was an early February post. At the time, today I post all my new content at 7:30 a.m. Eastern. At that time, I was posting around 10 o'clock in the morning. And I remember one of my posts was a copy of the map, the big the map room map that resides here in the map room. And I had it spread out on the floor of my country house in Connecticut, and I was standing on it, took a picture, and posted it. And I was in the JLO office that day, and between 10 and 11 o'clock, I must have had 7 or 8 people stop me and say, hey, saw that picture of that map on social media. That's so cool. And so 2 things struck me. One, wow, the reach of this is just really extraordinary. And because if that's happening here, that's probably happening, other people are probably seeing this. The other thing that occurred to me is, what the heck are these people doing looking at social media between 10 and 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning? Is get to work, make some calls. But I think it's really pervasive. I think there are a lot of people on, and I have to say that it is something that you have to use discipline very consciously with, because you could be on this stuff all day long.
Right.
And so I definitely, I limit the amount that I'm on because you can get carried away with it. But I think it's it's like anything, right? It's great in moderation.
Yeah. Right. Now, I got the impression from what you're saying, have you got a company that is actually working on retrofits and conversions of buildings, or is that just in selling people to people who want to convert?
No, those are brokerage services representing people who have these older office buildings, can't figure out what to do with them. They're probably running at negative cash flows based on the vacancy. Many of these buildings, 60, 70% vacant, and they need to get out. And residential conversion is one of the ways that will allow them to get a little more proceeds out of a sale than they would otherwise.
Yeah. And then you have I assume, a posse of people who do that are always keeping an eye on what you're bringing to market or what you're working on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always working with developers and redevelopers and folks who are looking at opportunities like this. We put together a team of folks to analyze these opportunities, including zoning people, policy people, architects, and can really drill down into what the possibilities are. Some buildings, all of these office buildings fall into 4 buckets, basically. One is a bucket that absolutely this building is a great candidate for conversion to resi. There's a bucket of buildings that absolutely cannot be converted to resi. And then there are 2 buckets in the middle. One that requires a little bit of elbow grease to make work, and one that requires a lot of elbow grease to make work. And so our prospecting hierarchy and prioritization revolves around how likely a particular property is likely to be converted.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this may be something you don't want to answer, but I mean, I'm curious, the evaluation, your team that is evaluating these and probably putting them in various buckets for the world to see and doing all the due diligence, is that just a cost and overhead that you absorb, or is that a service you sell to people? I'm just curious. And again, if that's something more particular than you want to answer.
Well, no, Dan, one thing, I'm completely transparent, completely open book. I'll answer anything. We are not really selling the service to anybody. We're providing the service. We have a team of folks that is doing all the analysis, figuring things out. And when somebody calls and says, hey, we're thinking about selling, could you come talk to us about our building? We'll go in and within 48 hours, we have extraordinarily detailed plans of what you can do, what you can't do, how you would maximize the density of the building, how you maximize the value, what programs you could take advantage of. There are a lot of bonus programs and air rights programs and things that tax abatement programs people could take advantage of. So we have full analysis that can be done literally within 48 hours and tell somebody what the possibilities for their property is.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting.
So that's a crucial expertise to have so that you can help sell the vision to whoever might end up being the buyer. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, our whole philosophy, look, the bottom line, everything revolves around the client, right? As a broker who only represents sellers, all I care about is getting the highest possible price for my client.
Yeah.
So how do I do that? I do that by looking at a property from every angle, looking at it the way a buyer would look at it, and figuring out how to create the most value, and then how to articulate that value proposition to the marketplace such that buyers buy into it and will pay more for a property based on all these different things that can be done to take advantage upon what's out there. And, I always say to potential sellers, look, the reason you should hire me is because I have to get you a high price. I'm a broker who only represents sellers. If I sell a property at a low price, I'm out of business.
Yeah.
What's the perfect scenario for me? The perfect scenario is I get hired to sell a building. We put it out to thousands of people. We have 200 people sign the confidentiality agreement, get all the information, and we get one buyer that buys the building. Well, I want the other 199 people that looked at that to say, oh my gosh, how did Knakal get such a high price for that building? If I ever sell anything, I'm using him.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the key to what my business is. I'm just trying to maximize value for my clients all day.
Okay. Yeah. Do you invest any on the equity side? Do you do any of that yourself?
Nope, not at all. Not at all. And for intentionally so, I think when we were running Massey Knakal for those 26 years and 46 days, every waking moment was spent trying to make that company valuable. We didn't want to do anything that would take us away from brokering or running the firm and creating value in the firm. And after selling the firm, I thought about what I wanted to do. And I said, you know what? I love being a broker. I love selling buildings. Going to keep doing it. And again, wanting to stay away from conflicts of interest. If you're just a broker and you're not a buyer, it's very easy not to have any conflicts of interest. And I never really wanted to have to answer the question if, people knew that I bought property also. And look, this is just something that works for me. There are a lot of people out there, they're brokers, they're buyers, they do all kinds of stuff, very, very successful. I just never wanted to offer a property to a client and have them say, hey, Bob, if this is such a great deal, why didn't you buy it? So I don't have to worry about answering that question. So I like to keep things very, very simple, and staying out of the principal side of the business is something that has worked for me. Plus, if I, as a broker, your income is dependent upon market conditions. If market conditions are bad and the brokerage business isn't doing well, very likely if I own buildings, the buildings wouldn't be doing too well either.
Right.
So not a very good diversification strategy.
Right. Well, Kansas City is a little different. In our market, we have done industrial brokerage for years, and we do have other partners that do other brokerage, office, some retail, and we do a lot of property management. But we also do development in this market, and that's some markets are small enough that we can do that, but it's gotten more complicated. I mean, with the nationals, we used to be much more of a locally held marketplace, but with the growth that we've seen in the last, 15, 20 years, that's gotten harder and harder.
Really?
Yeah. And like you said, there's, the fewer conflicts, the better. But in our worlds, it seems like there's always the potential for conflict out there.
Yeah, no, the reality is that unless you're in one of the really, really big markets nationally, very, very hard to stay focused on just one very narrow sector of the market. It's just the market size doesn't allow for that.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, we're industrial specialists, but to your point, we do tenant rep, landlord rep, buyer rep, seller rep. We really, because to your point, the market volume is just not there to be if someone's just a tenant specialist or a buyer specialist in our market, they're not doing many deals. So,
Yeah.
But really appreciate you coming on with us. I think we've hit the 30-minute mark, so I don't want to eat up too much of your time. But I had one question on your baseball card. I was just curious. I didn't realize you played college baseball until I saw a note the other day, which I think was pretty cool. And so I grew up playing baseball. Dan actually coached Stuart and I through Little League and all that, and was curious what position you played. And then this is probably a total outsider, non-local question because I should probably know what team you're a fan of, but I'm curious if you're a Mets or a Yankees guy. So,
okay, great questions, Kurt. I will tell you, I was a pitcher.
Okay.
The pitcher in baseball, and I haven't checked in a few years, but a few years ago, I was still number 4 on the all-time low ERA list at Penn.
Nice.
And Penn baseball's history goes back to 1865, so that's something that I'm proud of.
Righty or lefty?
I was a righty.
What was your pitch?
You know what? In high school, I had a good fastball and a really good curve.
Okay.
In college, the fastball wasn't quite fast enough, so I had a great, 12-6 curveball, and threw what I thought was a fork ball, but I threw it really hard, and it actually was a split-fingered fastball before the split-finger fastball was a thing.
There you go.
So I was kind of a junk baller in college.
Oh, there you go.
In terms of sports, I am a huge sports fan. A lifelong diehard Yankee fan, but I love to see the Mets do well. In fact, my first memory of baseball is running home from kindergarten to watch the Mets and the Orioles in the World Series. He ran home to watch it with my grandfather, who was a big baseball fan. And back in those days, they played the World Series games in the afternoon. But want to see the Mets do well. Rooted for them in 69, 73, 86. Yeah. But lifelong diehard Yankee fan. When it comes to football, lifelong diehard New York Giants fan, but want to see the Jets do well. Yeah. Comes to hockey, lifelong diehard Ranger fan, been a season ticket holder since 1984. And I hope the Devils and the Islanders lose every game they play.
There you go. We have similar feelings about some other teams around here, but we're big Chiefs and Royals guys. So, and I think baseball is a pretty good sport for real estate folks to grow up playing, because you learn that you can, succeeding 30% of the time is still a pretty good thing. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. Yankees and the Royals have had some great rivalries over the years. Great series. And I was at the George Brett Pine Tar game.
No kidding.
Which was a real thrill. But some great playoff baseball back in the 70s between the Royals and the Yanks.
Oh yeah. Some great love-hate relationships there. Yeah. I remember
this year, but
we'll talk about the Pine Tar deal, and I still remember too as a kid when George put it in the upper deck on Goose Gossage. It was all. I think that was the Pine Tar deal with winning off Goose when he and Billy Martin.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So George is actually a family friend, and Kurt was in school with 2 of his boys, and I actually coached one of his boys. So that was always lots of fun to be coaching baseball and having George standing there.
That's awesome. One of the all-time greats for sure.
Yeah, no doubt.
But Bob, thanks a lot for coming on. We appreciate it. And
any questions for us before you go?
No, this was great, guys. I really appreciate you having me on. For any of the viewers, listeners, if you want to ask me any questions, feel free to email me at bk@bkrea or .com. Follow me on social media, and always happy to answer questions from folks.
Super.
Thank you, BK. Appreciate it.
All right. Great to be with you guys.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Take care.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.